Good afternoon, or good evening, or good morning from wherever you are around the world. We are delighted to have you with us and to welcome Amii Barnard-Bahn today for our Institute webinar coaching on promotability, what it takes to get promoted in today's world. So as Sue indicated, my name is Jeff Hull. I'm the Director of Global Development here at the Institute of Coaching, and we are really excited to have Amii with us today and to have you joining us from all around the world. If you want to take a second and just say hello in the chat box, we love to see where folks are coming from. I'm always excited to note where people are usually joining us from all over the world, so say hello when you get a second. And just as a matter of logistics, we are going to have a presentation for 20 or 30 minutes from Amii, and then we'll open things up for question and answer and have a bit of a fireside chat for the second half. So please put your questions as they come up into the Q&A box, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So the names are flying by, and I just want to say hello to folks from, oh my God, San Jose, California. It's going by too fast, Amii. I can't read it all.
There's London, there's Canada,
London,
Boston.
all over. So welcome to you from around the world.
India, Mexico City.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's all great. Brazil, Boston. It's fabulous.
We're
London.
excited to have you here. So let me take a second for those of you who are not familiar with Amii Barnard-Bahn's work. She is a very active fellow with the Institute of Coaching, and she has recently put out a new book and a new guide called the Promotability Index, and a book that's a guide for promotability. And she is a senior executive coach, a keynote speaker, and she is focused on accelerating the success of Fortune 500 executives and their teams at companies such as Adobe, Bank of the West, and The Gap. She's a recognized expert in workplace culture, corporate governance, and ethical leadership. She works in partnership with leaders, teams, and boards in the US and abroad to successfully shape and support business strategy and performance excellence. She has her law degree from Georgetown University and was recognized by Forbes as one of the top coaches for legal and compliance executives in the world. And she contributes regularly to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Compliance Week. She guest lectures at Stanford, at UC Berkeley, and as I said, as a fellow with the Institute of Coaching and a dear friend of the Institute. So we have been wanting to get Amii to talk about her new book and her new guide for a long time. So I am really excited to have you here, Amii. And with that, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for having me. I really am excited to be here too. And thank you to everyone who's joining us from all over the world. I know it's late or very early for some of you. So we'll dive right in. And as Jeff said, please just, as you have questions, put them in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time at the end, I think, to share some of those. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will get started. So who gets promoted and why? One of our clients' biggest questions, probably, even if they don't ask us directly. Right. And I'm so happy to be invited here to share what I know about doing the things that take to be promoted. I was an executive for over 20 years, worked my way up in large corporations up to Fortune 5 C-suite. And I've been a chief human resources officer. I'm an employment lawyer and a chief compliance officer and an employment attorney. So with all those things, I've been through rifts, layoffs, seen what talent gets retained, what talent gets let go, hired teams, done recruitment. And that's kind of all the background I had. And then, of course, becoming a professional certified coach. And I'd say what I found, of course, is, as all of you know, is being a successful leader is more than just mastering your technical skills. There's some common key attributes that all great leaders possess that get them noticed by management and give them the power of influence. And influence enables leaders to gain employee trust in their vision and confidence in their ability to execute their ideas. And so working my way up in these organizations, I noticed that there were about 5 key elements, which I'll be going through with you, that will help your clients, I believe, in your work in getting them promoted if they so desire. And I'll also say now that promoted and promotability, I'm using broadly, both as a very specific concept on literally getting the next job, but I also mean it more broadly in not allowing your skill set to atrophy and to continue to be excited about your work and to continue to learn and to have a learner mindset. So keeping that in mind as we move forward. And I'll share some client stories about that. So the Promotability Index assessment that I created in early 2020 and released, I call it the PI for short. It's online, it's available. Some of you may have taken it. I think Harvard kindly sent out the link in advance. It's an 82 question assessment that anyone can take, and it enables anyone really in any industry at any point in their career to use the assessment and then the new guidebook to discover how their skills stack up against these 5 elements. And these are the 5 elements that leaders are really evaluating when they look at promotions and consider who they're going to invest in. And so my goal is to demystify, number one, what makes a person promotable, because it's not always obvious in a culture what makes someone promotable. And my goal is to help organizations make more equitable and objective leadership decisions. We all know there's a measure of subjectivity in promotions, but to the degree that we can focus organizations on objective criteria, I think we'll have better and more equitable decisions in that area. I know Jeff and I'll be talking about that and diversity in a bit. And I also want to empower individual employees to focus on what they can control. I think especially over the last year during the pandemic, it's been stressful and disheartening for a lot of people who feel an incredible sense of loss or control. And so my goal with the PI is also to put a feeling of control back into people's hands in terms of what can they work on while things are a little bit in flux. There's always a certain degree, of subjectivity in promotion, compensation, and hiring decisions, but we can do a better job of supporting organizations and individuals in reducing that amount of subjectivity and supporting more intelligent and actionable conversations that truly help people lean in and learn and move forward. So talking about bias, the PI is about who and how people move up in the organization. And to some degree, the PI normalizes for bias because it gives a language around and forces people to think of, what specific skills is this person missing? What do they need to work on? And some managers, as we know, are very well equipped to have excellent performance conversations with people, and some not so much. So we'd like for organizations to leverage the full talent that they have available to them. And so the common language and skill set around the PI gives leaders a tool that they can reference to consider when thinking about who to promote and why, that I hope will level the playing field a bit more. So a few things about the PI before we dive in. Number one, it was piloted and scoring was facially validated with my clients. Second, it's not intended to be a psychometric assessment like a personality assessment or many others like the Hogan or MBTI, TKI, many that we're probably all familiar with and certified in. It's intended to evoke and to inspire and to raise questions. It's intended to be hands-on and interactive. And it relies on a reasonable level of accuracy to the taker of the test as to their self-assessment, their curiosity, and their desire to improve. So it's not for people who want to just sit tight and hang out. 1 year after the PI was launched, I was asked to do more. They said, this is great. Now I know what I need to work on. How do I do it? And that's how the guidebook was born. And so I also wrote and piloted that content with a wonderful team who gave me some wonderful improvements to it before we launched the publication in May. So the guidebook is designed with clear process steps that are flexible and I hope allow creativity to spark and ownership to be with your client. It's obviously much more powerful if they're working with you as a coach to do that. It's structured and designed as a journal to be written and doodled and dreamed in, as well as to have some hardcore feedback and structure around actions they can take. I want people to be able to read it backwards or in the middle or just pick it up and put it down, but it also has structure around the process. We know careers aren't linear and promotions and compensations do have structure. So the book was made both in a flexible and a structured way, just like in real life. So what are the 5 key elements? So as you all may be aware, research has shown that leaders primarily succeed or fail based on 2 things. The first is how well they know themselves. And the second is how well they get along with others. So those are the first two elements of promotability: self-awareness, the degree to which they know themselves, and how that's directly correlated to their professional success. And second, external awareness, how to build powerful working relationships with their key stakeholders. The third is strategic thinking. And this is actually an important distinction. This is whether senior management views your client as being a strategic thinker, not whether they are a strategic thinker. I'm sure we can all think of people that we know are incredibly brilliant and very strategic. But if that can't be seen, if those clients aren't asking the right questions, if they're not viewed that way, they're not viewed as a strategic thinker. And the higher you get in an organization, strategic thinking and being viewed as a strategic thinker is critical. The fourth is executive presence. And that's the degree to which you can inspire confidence in others through gravitas and presentation skills, establishing credibility. And then the fifth is thought leadership. And that's around being respected and sought after and well-known as an expert in your field. So when leaders focus on the 5 elements, they're able to influence key outcomes at their firms, and they're effectively leading and maximizing full potential of their teams. And I find that they're able to move forward with greater confidence and peace of mind, avoiding burnout and enjoying a more balanced life. So let's start with the first element, self-awareness. So of the 5 key leadership elements, I start with self-awareness because you really need to be self-aware first and honest with yourself if you're serious about doing the work to optimize career opportunities. And I know you know this with your clients. We need them to be all in. We can't work harder than they are. So self-awareness is fundamental to effective leadership. It's the ability to be introspective, to accurately reflect on our behaviors, emotions, and attitudes. And as I'm sure all of you are familiar with Daniel Goleman, he's also cited this as one of the 2 reasons that leaders succeed or fail. Self-awareness, if our clients are able to improve in this area, enables them to view themselves objectively without judgment. And if they have an accurate and honest view of themselves, this enables them to make good decisions and course correct if necessary. So some examples of my work in this area with clients on improving self-awareness is, number 1, setting a leadership vision, really knowing their how, why, and what, which I would also describe as their values. What are their values? What motivates them? And what are their interests? Another area I work on with self-awareness is knowing their derailers. I'm sure, again, a lot of you work on this with clients. What sets them off? Working on their awareness of their reactive habits that are not serving them, and then choosing a more rewarding behavior that is aligned with those visions and outcomes that you've set with them. And then the third is an awareness of blind spots. They may not be aware of how they're coming off, and that is pretty important for that. So the next area is external awareness. And external awareness and self-awareness overlap a bit, but I called it out separately because even if your client is doing and saying the right things and has the right intent internally, that doesn't always show up externally, and they may not be aware of their impact on others, because how they do and say things can be perceived in different ways, and perception really matters. And one of my favorite speakers, Carla Harris, who some of you may be familiar with, she has a fantastic TED Talk I highly recommend. She says, perception is the co-pilot to reality. And any of you have done a 360 for your clients, many of you I'm sure have, you know that this is definitely the case in companies. And external awareness is how others experience your client and their behavior. And it's popularly expressed right now, I would say, as your brand, your personal brand. I was recently speaking with my client who I did a case study with that you'll see later about the Promotability Index. And she said, Amii, all 5 of these elements are really important, but this external awareness is the one that'll come up and kill your career if you don't get it right. And I found that as well with my clients. So examples of my work with clients that include external awareness, and I would love to hear yours as well, so feel free to put them in the chat. First, building a high performance team, because the higher you get, and I generally work with the C-suite, they are judged by their team. And so if their team is succeeding and is doing remarkable, then it reflects on an awareness of that person as a leader. So it's an extension of their reputation. The second is mentoring others. Now, I feel like that's so important for us to always be mentoring other people. The third is keeping a no list. And this is also around, when you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And leaders, particularly the more senior they get asked to do a lot of stuff. And if they're not really careful, they may pick non-strategic projects to work on, busy work, things that are not funded, not really supported. They need to be careful on what they're saying yes to. And so they may turn to you as a guide to help them ask the right questions, to be thinking through those kinds of things that will either build and enhance the external awareness of how they're coming across or not. And then another area is keeping healthy boundaries. I had one client who was saying no to everything, actually, and was keeping boundaries very well, but was not, as a result, building good stakeholder relationships. And so we had to reset those boundaries once she realized that externally she was not being perceived the way she thought she was. She thought she was saying yes to only the most important work. And in fact, her stakeholders felt that she was being unsupportive and not listening. So while external awareness is one of the most fundamental leadership qualities, I also think it can be very hard for clients to improve on their own. And so we know as coaches that this is one of our most valuable roles, I believe, exposing perceptions and blind spots. And we know that it's part of human nature that people don't feel comfortable giving candid feedback directly, even though we wish they would, but especially if they report directly in the reporting line to our client. And so that's why many leaders turn to us as coaches to create a psychologically safe space for other people to give that candid feedback and collect this data, elicit behavior themes, and support them on how to move forward. And we know that this is where very, very senior leaders can get tripped up, because the higher you go, the less feedback you get. It's very quiet at the top, but it's critical to getting promoted. And so empowering your client with this knowledge of how they show up to others and how they show up to you. I'm sure many of you have had experiences where you're working with a client and you hear some things and suddenly you actually see it in your coaching with them. Either they lose their temper with you, or they are impatient, or they're not clear about something. Those moments of being present in the moment and giving them that feedback can be incredibly corroborative and helpful. So arming your client with this knowledge of how they're showing up provides incredible benefits, because if they're armed with that information, as you know, they can then do something about it. Third element is strategic thinking. And this really separates leaders from everyone else. These 5 elements build on each other. They're in a bit of order. They're iterative, and I think of them more in a spiral. But I would say that strategic thinking comes after you have a good handle on self-awareness and external awareness. And it's really, strategic thinking is a demonstrated ability to see and understand the bigger picture, where you are now, where you want to be, and how you want to get there. And I mean that both for the organization that the client is in, as well as their own career and their career goals. So strategic thinking can be applied, I think, and should be simultaneously with the client in both ways. It takes several things into account, such as mission and values, which are outside the scope of the self-assessment. But for purposes of promotability, as I mentioned earlier, as a coach, I'm focused on the degree to which senior management views my client as a strategic thinker and does things like asking for their input on major decisions. So I try to help my client assess whether they've adopted good habits in terms of applying strategic thinking about their own career as well. Are they staying open to a lateral move? Maybe it's not time for them to get that promotion, and we learn they need to prove 2 or 3 more things before they're going to move up as opposed to across. Or are they identifying and working on and obtaining the necessary skills for that next role? Have they done their homework? So in simple terms, strategic thinking is your client's ability to think more broadly than their own immediate tasks. And it's the degree to which they can think in terms of systems, to see into the future, recognize interdependencies, assess the pros and cons of a given course of action, and I'd say especially right now, tolerate ambiguity. And to some degree, it also incorporates their appetite for risk taking. And I would say there's really no other capability listed in the Promotability Index that can be more difficult to cultivate, because it requires other people to trust your client and hand off power if they want to build and exercise how well they're doing in their strategic thinking. So some of my examples of client work with strategic thinking are making time for it. Number one, literally blocking time every week. I do it myself. I take a look at my business, my clients. What should I be working on? Am I working on the most important things? What should I be thinking about that's 5 years down the road? And should I be working on that now? So that's in place. The second area that I work on with them is gaining a fresh perspective, getting them out of their comfort zone, potentially suggesting that they join a task team or start an initiative in their organization that is not related to their core skill set, so that they are stretching themselves and can get a fresh perspective, seeing something from someone else's perspective. And then another thing that I do sometimes is a future visioning exercise, picturing their role 5 years out. What's the technology that might be coming down the line that will change things? How will that change things? What business cycle is their organization in? Are they in a high growth mode? Are they in a flat mode? Are they in a decline? And are they going to catch a second wave? Where are they? And what are the trends? Some junior clients, I'll mention, can be challenged in getting exposure to the type of information that they need to think strategically. And that can be really frustrating for them. If they don't have a large enough scope of responsibility or invitations to vision setting meetings where all this big picture stuff is discussed and the entire business is reviewed, so they can see the whole system in order to access competitive information, connect concepts, and formulate insights. And it's those opportunities to experience bigger successes and to risk bigger mistakes that allow them to build strategic thinking skills. So what they can do at this time is ask for more responsibility, put it out there, and work to understand senior management's perspective. Find out what areas their senior management is reading, working on, what their top projects are, how they can learn more, keeping up on business trends that impact the industry so they can start to formulate new insights. The fourth element is executive presence. And I love this one because this has gotten so much attention over the past several years in talent considerations. And why is it so important? It's important because when you have executive presence, you establish immediate credibility with people around you. And this gives you power to influence openness to your ideas and to get the green light on projects, which can be very important, of course, to your clients. It's also the basis for cultivating respect and trust. Now, respect and trust can be earned over time, but that first initial impression serves to either accelerate a relationship or possibly to derail it. And executive presence has also been ill-defined, I think, in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to define it for you here with my favorite definition. I love this definition because everyone can work and improve on these three things. The first is presentation skills. And Kokwal, formerly known as the Institute for Creative Learning, they define executive presence and break it down into three tangible weighted qualities. And they assess, after doing a study, that 70% of executive presence could be attributed to presentation skills. Huge for your clients. And that's about educating and engaging your audience. The second is gravitas. And that's the ability to remain cool and calm under pressure. And their studies showed that was about 20% of executive presence. And the third was professional appearance, which is actually only came in at 10%. So it's important, but probably just for that first impression. And that's just being, in my opinion, being well-groomed and dressing appropriately for your workplace, whatever that is for you. And examples of my work in external awareness with clients, a lot of focus on presentation skills, dry running, key meetings, difficult conversations, whether it's with an employee who's not performing or talking to the board about a risk area that they really may think they don't want to hear about, but they have to. And we do role playing, presenting live and recording, practicing that. Second area we work on is self-management around stress for gravitas, because stress can really derail gravitas. As I'm sure we've all had over the past year and a half. I know I've reacted to things as opposed to stopping, thinking, being aware, making a good decision, and having grace under pressure. So those are things that are very, very important, as you know, because sometimes your executives only get one shot at making that impression with a board member that they rarely see, especially on Zoom or other areas. The fifth and final area is thought leadership. And the more senior your client is, the more important this element will be. For example, the company may be a startup and they may need funding, or your client may want to serve on a corporate board one day and they need to be known for their expertise. So thought leadership establishes your client's identity as a contributor and as someone who's forward thinking and influential in whatever their domain expertise is. And it brings visibility to your client and the company. And so putting my attorney hat on for a minute, for any really high profile activities like podcasting or blogging or keynote speaking, remind your client to navigate any approval process that their company might have for thought leadership. But usually, if it's well done, companies love it because it brings them extra marketing and attention. Thought leadership leads to incredible tangible rewards. Done well, your client's currency professionally rises, and that of their company as well, because their skills are more marketable, their network is strong, and speaking and other professional engagement opportunities come more easily. So some examples of my work in external awareness include identifying interest inside and outside of work, which could be boards, nonprofit or for-profit, writing and speaking for industry conferences. Everybody needs content. Conferences are starting to experiment with going back in person. I know I have a few this fall, but some are still virtual. So sometimes you don't even have to travel. We've talked about potentially identifying and leading a corporate-wide initiative that can also demonstrate thought leadership. And the great thing about thought leadership is it compounds over time. These activities, writing, speaking, really highlight your expertise, groom people for promotion, and get them noticed in the right way and accelerate their knowledge. Now, one thing to talk about is Fortitude. We all know the power of coaching when a client is all in with us. And the 5 key elements of promotability can really change their life. I really recently wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review called Promotions Just Aren't About Your Skills, They're About Your Relationships. And a majority of the executives that I coach are technical specialists. They're knowledge workers. They have advanced degrees in law or in medicine or in technical fields that require certifications and significant knowledge. And I'm sure you've run into this as well, but many professionals who want to continue, but who get stuck, focus too much on just gathering more and more and more knowledge and certifications and reading up on all the news and going to conferences and roundtables. But we know that people reach a point where no matter how many certifications they collect, how hard they work, how smart and knowledgeable they are, they still may not get promoted and may not get the results they want or the resources they need for their teams. And they can just get stuck working harder and harder and risking burnout without getting traction. And so as coaches, I feel like it's our role to support our clients in seeing the possibilities of where they really are spending their time, gaining awareness of where they could get out of their comfort zone and put more time in, and overcoming their fear of change. Because if they've been doing something for a while, they've obviously been successful at it and it's worked for them. But to quote one of Jeff and my favorite colleagues, Marshall, what got you here won't get you there. And so we've got to get them out of their comfort zones and trying new things. And so with your partnership, I think they can do that. I will show you a quick case study here. You'll be getting these slides, so my apologies if this is a bit tiny to read, but we did a case study. Some companies have implemented the Promotability Index as a part of their annual performance cycle as the proactive part, as opposed to the retrospective compensation and evaluation part. They have realized, maybe we're not doing a good enough job on developing our employees, especially in a remote environment. This is a great way for employees to feel engaged and cared for, and again, for them to feel like they have some control over what is going on in their work. So one of my clients at a credit union that's a top 100 US-based credit union with over 200,000 members implemented this, and we did a study, and they have a 12-month review cycle, just like a lot of people do. And my client wanted to have more of a path to promotability and be more helpful in her feedback to her clients around the skills they had, where they were doing well, and what they would be missing and what they needed to work on if they wanted to continue to advance in the organization, either there or outside of there. And we all know Gen Z expects to work at companies that are investing in their skill set and that will make them more promotable, not necessarily at their current company, which is a hard thing for some companies to swallow. But we know that's happening. So over the full course of a year, which had 2 review periods, they implemented the PI and had conversations with their manager. They did the assessment, they brought the results to their manager, reviewed it with their manager gave them feedback and validated their perceptions, yes or no, on whether it was accurate. There were some wonderful stories actually where people had rated themselves lower than their boss would have rated, and that was a really positive experience for them to realize they were doing a good job in that. And then a couple of areas where there were disconnects, and that was also a very healthy argument conversation to have. So results on this were 100% of employees welcomed the candid feedback and felt that they had received detailed guidance on where they could grow. We learned that 70% were interested in promotion and 30% were not. 30% were happy staying in their current role, and they gained performance insights. And that was also extremely helpful for my client to know where to put their investments and how to approach those people. For people who are not interested in promotion, they were looking at lateral assignments and other ways to challenge. 60% were on track for promotion within 3 years. And then my client also used the PI to groom her successor. So what we found is having a common language and a methodology gave the team a more comfortable and psychologically safe way to talk about some of these tougher issues that they needed to address. So we really know that today's way is about awareness and accountability, and how leaders who know themselves and know how they work with others and eliminate blind spots are going to be the most effective leaders. And one of my favorite quotes comes from Peter Drucker, who says, "You should not change yourself, but create yourself." And that means build around your strengths and remove your bad habits. And I've always loved this quote, but I think it's particularly prescient now. A recent study found that hard skills and technical knowledge now only have a lifespan of 4 to 6 years. So hard skills, technical skills are atrophying at an increasing velocity. And this means that all of our relationship skills and the key elements that we're discussing are going to be, I think, more and more important over time. So I would say that for the PI, one thing that you can do with your clients is to think about where their stage is. And it can also be used by your clients with their teams. One bit of feedback I got from one of my clients is they loved the exploring, establishing, or advancing categories. I don't want people to get too rigid about these, but the Promotability Index does put you into one of these 3 categories. And an accounting firm that I was working with said that it was very helpful. The partner was trying to explain to a very young associate how they were still in their exploring stage with clients, and they were not yet established. They did not have their own book of business yet, things like that. And so that was extremely helpful. Figuring out what they want to work on next, validating their results with their boss, team, and trusted peers, and creating an action plan around the 1 or 2 things in which they scored lowest is what I found to be key. And then revisiting 9 to 12 months later. Ideally, if they've been doing the work, their score will go up. And we all know that psychologically, that's just a positive thing. I intentionally didn't make the score 100. It's an 82. It's actually, I also personally believe, impossible to get an 82. So I wanted to make the PI aspirational and something that you can always work towards. I believe in always growing, and there always being things you can do. And so I wanted to do it that way. So we all know that having an exceptional career requires advanced planning and doing the work. And if your client is committed to these things that are missing from their skill set, I think they're guaranteed to have more opportunities and greater satisfaction. So with that, I will start to close up, and I'll turn to your questions. If you have not already, if you're in the United States, you can get the Promotability Index, which I have made free and accessible to anyone, by texting the word "promote me" to 44222. It's also available on my website. If you're not in the United States, there's a link you can click on to get that. The PI guidebook is a companion. It's available wherever books are sold. I have a discount code that I'm happy to give you later for the digital version. Jeff just reminded me, I would love to connect with all of you and hear your thoughts and learn about your work and how this might be helpful to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and be human again here with Jeff. And There we go. Did that
There you
work? Am I
go.
back on? Okay,
You're
good.
back on. It's great.
Yay. Okay.
So thank you so much. We have tons of questions, and I'm going to encourage people to put more in. First question I have to ask you is that your doggie that's barking in the background?
Yes, it is. And I kicked her out because she was I told her, I said, you're barking too much. She'd already started. Someone's getting their trees cut across the street.
Okay.
And,
I think everybody calm down as long as they know that it's yours.
It's mine. I'm sorry. She's adorable, but she's...
They're absolutely fine. It's great. That's part of the fun of working virtually these days, right?
Yes. She's usually curled up on the couch, but the barky quotient was too high today, so I didn't let her in.
Well, so let's get started with some questions. While people are putting the questions in, and I get to be selfish because I always get to ask the first question, and then it's always one that's directly related to me.
Go for it, Jeff.
Hopefully relevant to everyone. But I have a client situation, and I'd love for you to comment on this. So I have a very senior R&D scientist that I'm working with, and he has been told that he could have an even higher role in this very large pharmaceutical organization, but he needs to be more adept at this vision thing, or as you would call it, the strategic thinking. And what's interesting about this is that he is a scientist, so he tends to be very micro focused on data, evidence, and it tends to be very micro view of the world. And so I'm curious how you would work with someone who struggles with big picture, long-term kinds of thinking, because that's kind of what you're pointing to when you talk about the need to focus on strategic thinking.
True. And I actually have a client that's with the same issue, Jeff. Really? So I can, they're responsible for commercialization for gene therapy, and absolutely brilliant. And actually, just remarkable. So the first thing I look to is I go back to motivations. I go back to, I use the Hogan, and I find that extremely helpful. I know some people use StrengthsFinder. There's many other great tools out there. Right. So use whatever you're comfortable with. I would say I'm tool agnostic. But you should know how to leverage the motivation. And so I would say, okay, what motivates this person? Because that's if you're looking to change their perspective and thinking more strategically is a change. They've been very comfortable clearly in their technical knowledge, and they've been rewarded up to this point for that, right? So we have all these reinforcing incentives and behaviors. So to get them out of that, I go back to square one, which is what motivates them, what are their values? And I look at that very closely and then think about, okay, how can I tie that? How can I help them tie that to thinking more strategically and then this end goal that they have of getting promoted? And it's that middle part that we're working with, right? And so for me, it would be around, getting results, having greater influence. Do you want greater? Do they value, frankly, power or altruism? In this case, is very high for my client because she does what she does not for the money, but to help patients. And so we've said, okay, if you can think more strategically, you can help more patients. So you'll get better results and outcomes. And she's very execution oriented. So between her altruism and her execution, and she does actually have high power as well, we have pulled together a way for her to then step back and start thinking. So one exercise I gave to her was to do a broad stakeholder map and to draw it out. She's more creative, and she's writing out kind of an assessment of who does she feel she already has great relationships with, who does she not really know in terms of the pieces of the organization and what they're doing, and who could she meet with more regularly. And this is all virtual. They've always been virtual, the entire company. So it's not a COVID related culture. So their culture is very used to just picking up the phone. And how can she get that extra perspective that will help her think more strategically? Relationships where, again, she'll be viewed as being more strategic because she's reaching out. She tends to just rely on herself and her knowledge. So I think we're talking about strategic thinking, both in the ability to have the strategic thinking, as well as being viewed as a strategic thinker. Because once you get to the C-suite, Having been there, I can tell you, multiple times I've been there as a CHRO and I've been there as general counsel and as chief compliance officer. Yeah, I have my role to say a legal opinion or an HR or human capital management an opinion, but I also better have an opinion about the direction the business is going. And I better be up on trends. I better have been reading the 10K if it's a public company. And, you're a team player at that point. They're looking at you beyond your ability. And the same with corporate boards. They do a lot of corporate board and work. And you need to be able to play on all levels, ideally. I hope that's helpful, but
It is. Yeah. The image that's conjured in my mind, it's very helpful, is it's kind of like a periscope.
yes,
My client is a scientist, has been using for 20 years his microscope.
perfect.
And now he needs to use a
I love that.
periscope.
And that's a great metaphor for him.
Yeah. And I came to me as I was thinking about your discussion of stakeholders, because I think that the understanding of the breadth rather than the vertical focus is what is a big shift for him in the mindset in terms of being more strategic. Is he's R&D focused, so he focuses on his area where it's science and data and results. And what you're pointing to is that once you get to a senior level and he's vying for an R&D group level, he has to be thinking about what's going on all around him and be able to participate in that and have an opinion in that space. So having stakeholder relationships, having knowledge, being curious. So it's like looking up and out rather than just looking down in his microscope. So
it'd be great if he could be on a cross-functional team that is definitely not going to leverage his expertise.
Right. Oh yeah, exactly. That's great. Thank you for that.
Sure.
So question coming in about executive presence. I really love this question from Heather Jelks. She's asking, and I've had this situation too. Many of us, I think, have had millennials or emerging leaders, Gen X, that are moving up quickly. How do you coach them in terms of gravitas, executive presence? Maybe they don't get to make a lot of presentations, but they want to move their career to that place where they have a reputation for executive presence. What are some of your tips for that kind of coaching?
I would say that they should recognize every interaction as an opportunity. And I am talking about, it would have been, I almost said in the elevator, but that's a little up in the air. I get that. Excuse me, but even in a group meeting, let's say there's a town hall, ask a question, ask a good question. And look good on camera, look professional, good eye contact, which you can do very easily on Zoom. You can look at everyone by looking at the right place on your computer. So that's never been easier, good eye contact. And we all know the psychological benefits of that and the trust that imbues and the personal connection that we get from that. And I would say for them to look for ways to volunteer, to get involved. Everybody had a COVID task force, a year ago. No one knew what the heck to do with COVID and everything. There's going to be return to work task forces. There's going to be other things. Find out what's a pet project that's sponsored well, and can you go and take notes? Can you? My daughter's 19 and she's doing some of this right now with internships, and she's getting noticed. There are many, many ways. Don't ever underestimate any interaction and opportunity to just be helpful, be professional. And I think gravitas and just continuing to show that you are ready for more in those ways, but showing rather than telling. I mean, yes, you should also put it out there, but the showing is equally important as opposed to just demanding. There are very ineffective ways to ask for more responsibility or to ask for a promotion. I'm wondering if we'll get any questions about that too.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think the key there that you're pointing to is to recognize that executive presence is a 100% of your life kind of experience. It's not a one-off. It's not when you get back to the office. It's not, and it's every single time. And keeping that in mind, that every single interaction you have is an opportunity to have that kind of presence. Yeah. I know that I find when I worked with a couple of clients around gravitas that were either millennial or Gen X, and they're just sort of on the cusp of senior level roles, one of the things that was eye-opening for them was to have a conversation around the power of silence.
Yes.
That part of gravitas comes from actually what you don't say.
True.
Because I think we have a tendency to think that you're presenting, therefore it's talk, ask the question, be participant, all of which is true, right? To your point, ask a good question at the right moment. But there's also something about owning an audience, and that can come from in the middle of talking, stopping and taking a breath and having a break. And that creates that, oh, well, this person is owning the space, so it's credible. I had a couple of younger clients that I worked with who found that to be a really profound shift.
That's a great pointer.
Because gravitas is very difficult to coach. So I appreciate that you're commenting on that.
There's an inner and an outer game, I think, with
Right.
gravitas, and some of it can spill over into presentation skills like pregnant pauses, or making sure that your audience is with you, being comfortable
Right.
with making sure that that it's about, that you've made the presentation about your audience, not about you. I've seen a lot of neophytes, come into board meetings and walk away very disappointed when they had worked very hard on an ask because they didn't prep properly. So
yeah, it makes all the difference.
mm-hmm.
We have, I think, a really important question. I'd love for you to comment on this, and I'm going to just go back to see if I can find the name of the person, because of course I scroll and I miss it. But it was if you would comment on whether or not you've studied the impact of your assessment on race and gender. Laura Welch had a really good question about this, whether the same set of principles applies, whether there's any distinctions that you've noted in the
I'm actually looking for that now. We added, when I launched the book, the assessment was initially a PDF version only. And when I launched the book in May, I migrated the assessment online, and I included demographic data, including age and race, ethnicity, gender. And I'm looking forward to, after I've collected enough, to take a look at that. I have not received any anecdotal feedback from clients or others that it has had any impact. And I, having been involved in diversity and inclusion, and I don't know if we'll get into some of my work there or not, but it's very important to me that it actually creates opportunity and breaks the dialogue down so that it's more equitable than not. What I found in my work in-house is that some promotion decisions came down to just whether someone liked someone. I've been in a meeting where and seen a conversation just go sideways, where the CEO literally just said, and I quit this company actually after this happened. The executive team, they were on track. They were being discussed and promoted by their boss, and the CEO just laid back in his chair and was silent, Jeff, which everyone noticed. And because he, did a big this, and he said, I had this one interaction with this guy, and I don't think he's a fit for the company. And it just, there was no data given. His own boss thought he was doing a great job. I mean, but that happens in these things. And so my hope is that this will not happen, but I look forward to validating that more, is the long answer.
But it sounds like you found that this assessment and the kind of coaching dialogues that can emerge from it have been helpful, regardless of whether you're working with females or cis men or any particular background.
Yes.
That's great. Getting a couple of questions that are a little bit like what I asked, but a different framing about my scientist, which is Sue Morris is asking, what if you have a client who is very focused on detail, highly intelligent, introverted, but perhaps they may want a career advancement, but they may not be suited for moving up the ladder necessarily.
They want to, or they don't, me?
Well, she's saying the client wants career advancement. It doesn't necessarily indicate whether or not that's a leadership role. But I think many of us as coaches have seen this individual contributor expert type client.
Yes, and I had a few who were in my pilot. I intentionally included a few in my pilot, actually. And they still found that the only area that tripped them up was the word promotability. They just said,
Mm,
hey, do you not mean me? Am I not included in this? And I said, no. I said, please don't take the word that way. It's really intended to indicate a growth mindset, and it means promoting yourself as much as having some organization promote you. It means, a continuous learner. So for individual contributors, I would say, again, I mentioned that data point about the rate at which technical knowledge is becoming atrophied. I think that technical experts need to also just be thinking, even if they don't want to get promoted and they're very happy where they are, they just need to stay relevant and stay up to speed in their area. And another way of strengthening their area is to not just focus on their credentials in their area. You can still be an individual contributor, but be highly valued as someone who also helps out on this project or helps out on that project or is cross-functional. Everything we've said today, I think, can apply to individual contributors.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a really important clarification, especially in today's world where organizations are getting flatter. That,
Exactly.
more and
Mhm.
more, the opportunity I find with my clients is about influence and impact. And in fact, I think our colleague Bill Berman from who's also a fellow at the Institute just wrote a book called Influence and Impact. And I think that's really relevant to what you're talking about. It's less sometimes about moving up a ladder than it is about having more influence and impact in your role and in your organization. And that these 5 capabilities
Yes.
are what will help you have those experiences, right?
Well, and it makes you less expendable. Forbes recently wrote about my book, and the title was something around expendability. I thought that's right on. That's exactly what I was also hoping to help prevent for people, because again, if you're not watching and you're not growing, again, you may not care about being CEO or CHRO. And if you don't want to be, you shouldn't, because that's a hell of a job. If you don't want to manage people, don't. It's tough. It's a huge responsibility and a privilege to lead other people. But if you're an individual contributor, you also probably want to work as long as you want to work. You probably don't want someone else to make that decision for you. So it's really wise to continue to find ways to be valuable to your company, or if it's not a fit, work towards getting, pivoting to where you do want to be.
Absolutely. So as we're winding down here, there's a really interesting question I'm going to ask you, because hopefully Carla, who put it in the chat, will maybe clarify exactly what she means. But she asked, if these are the key elements to success, why are there so many so-called dark triad CEOs or dark triad leaders promoted to the C-suite? I think maybe she didn't clarify what she means, but my sense is that, I'm from New York. We just are losing our governor.
Right? Oh my
Yeah,
gosh. Although we're getting our first woman governor in New York. So
that's true. We are getting
exciting.
Our first woman governor.
Sorry that it took that, right? But
yeah, but I guess the question is that if these are kind of the proven areas of focus for development, especially self-awareness, right? Why is it that so many, I hate to say it, but mostly men, end up in C-suite jobs when they're particularly narcissistic or they have huge blind spots in terms of their behavior? What's your sense of that?
There are some great articles on that, particularly that I read when I was, going through. The PI is my vision of what a true leader should be, a servant leader. So it has, my bias in that in terms of business ethics, being honest with people. It's based on an aspirational goal that the best leaders are promoted. And however, it will not cure the fact that very powerful, not very nice people will continue to get promoted and lead. It will not cure that. This is not for companies that have that kind of vision. This is for companies and leaders who have a vision where they believe in fairness and equity, and they believe that they should have a role in helping everyone achieve their potential and be, Jeff, you're aware, but I do a lot in the corporate governance space. I lobbied for the first laws in the country to require women to be on corporate boards. You would think we wouldn't need a law, but oh well. So did that in a few states out here in the West. And so this is around aspirationally, how I think it should be. And unfortunately, that isn't always the case, but I hope that boards are looking at that more. The SEC has recently implemented a recommended rule that is requiring human capital metrics to be reported, which are things like turnover and employee satisfaction. As a business ethics professional and corporate compliance officer, I've implemented investigation systems and all kinds of things in other companies. And so how are people treated? Do they feel comfortable speaking up? Those kinds of things are all a part of what I think makes a great company. And so that's embedded in there. This is not like, what's that great book by Machiavelli? This is not that on, how to grab power and then keep it.
The Art of War.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, there's Sun Tzu, and then there's
Prince. Yes,
the Prince. Thank you.
Jordan put it
there's
in
the Prince. Thank you, Jerry and Jonathan and everyone. The Prince. Exactly. So those I would go read those books if that's the management style you're stuck under. But my hope is for a better future for everyone.
Well said. Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's wonderful about the kind of work that you're doing, and that how you're representing these tools and offering tools for us as coaches, is that moves us more toward what I would call a communitarian, ethical, collegial, respectful environment of leaders who do care about how they come across, who do care about what's going on in their organization, who do care about how they are impacting each other and how they are impacting the world. And that's one of our roles as coaches, is to forward that. So I really, if you can believe it, we are down to one last minute here. And Amii, if you want to take a second to put up your slide or the contact information you had about the discount you wanted to offer.
Oh, thank you. Let me see.
Yeah, it'd be great, because I think people are interested in using this.
Okay, I will. Luckily, I created a Word doc. I realized I could never, because I want to be present when everyone's asking questions, but I just put a big chunk of info in there that has my website. I have 20% off if you would like, of the digital interactive PDF that's good until the end of the month. And then please feel free to connect with me. My primary social media channel is LinkedIn, but I am active as well in a moderate way on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter.
And she's also very well connected to me. So you can always contact me if you're interested in tracking her down. And she's involved with a recent research project at the Institute of Coaching, which we're going to be publishing in the next couple of weeks. So we are thrilled to have you here today, Amii. I want to thank you for taking the time. It's been a pleasure. And I can see from all the comments that people found it very, very valuable. So
I hope so. Well, thank you so much.
And hopefully you'll have great luck with this new tool, and we'll see you sometime soon. We look forward to it.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for attending. And thank you so much for inviting me, Jeff.
Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Take care. Bye-bye.